please welcome to the stage Pradeep Singh.
Welcome to Demystifying Web3. I see a lot of people coming in. Can give a second. Good to wear some pants and come out from our homes. Thank you for joining the session. Let me welcome my panel, Abhishek Sharma, Senior Vice President, LPL Financials. Nish Krishna, CEO, Konduit. And I'll request the team to switch on the video for Nuno from EY.
Center stage.
Let's start with first, maybe give a quick introduction. Abhishek, I'll start with you. Share your experiences, and maybe it's a very cool topic, but there is a lot of mist around this topic.
That's right.
Maybe define Web3 for the audience, please.
Yeah, so a little bit about myself. Everybody calls me Avi. I'm local to Charlotte, right? I've been here for more than 6 years, and prior to that, came from a small company based in DC. I have more than 20 years experience in technology. Last decade has been focused on wealth management, fintech, and I'm happy to be here as an SME from wealth management space to talk about Web3, a very hot topic, as most of us know about it. So I think Web3 has a lot of promise. It's a great opportunity, which many people call it like a potentially once-in-a-generational opportunity. Now, to define Web3, if you look at how did we land over here, a lot came from our need of how internet was incepted. We wanted to share data, we wanted to share content. It started with Web 1.0, with static pages. You download the content, review the content. Evolved for the last more than 15 years into Web 2.0, which was more about e-commerce, is about sharing data, again, more complex applications. But one thing that was very interesting about it is not only as a consumer, we are getting this data, but all these macro major organizations are getting our data and our personal information, our information of our pattern of using their data, and in many cases, inadvertently, unknowingly. And these organizations put that data to use in terms of examples like targeted marketing. And this is where I think Web 3.0 comes into play. The promise of Web 3.0 is it's a consumer's economy. It's a consumer's ownership economy, where it's about you as a consumer, content creator, will have control in terms of how the world looks at me, how my content is published to the entire world. And if I choose to do so, I get rewarded for it. Maybe payments, tokens, whatever the term may be, right? And that's why I think the concept of decentralized, autonomous organizations, which is a promise of Web3, is pretty prominent and is very, very promising in my opinion.
So in your words, it is the internet of the users.
Absolutely.
Nish, how about you?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Nish, and so again, a little bit about sort of how I have found personally and professionally in Web3. So my background has been in lending and payment space. The first 12 years of my career, spent time in Capital One, M&T Bank, PenFed Credit Union. So nothing to do with Web3. Nobody is perfect. But then I started Konduit, and at Konduit, we have an embedded fintech platform that allows banks to use fintechs, and Web3 is one of the core, some of the concepts of Web3, especially around smart contracts, is what we are using to enable this platform and a new way of integrating with other fintechs. I think Web3 is a few different concepts, so let's just throw out some of the things that you might have heard about Web3. I think at the heart of it, it's kind of the common glue is that internet of users, data ownership, but there is also, of course, blockchain, right, around distributed ledger, and that's not necessarily data ownership, right? It can be smart contracts, which is around automation, uses blockchain. There are things like all these NFT tokens. There are things people are now talking about like soul tokens, which are kind of like NFTs, but they are non-transferable, so they're unique and also non-transferable. And then there is, of course, data ownership, which I think is the most interesting of all, and sort of, I think all these concepts have business values and societal value, but I think the fact that we are looking at an internet in 5-10 years, at least that's a vision, of logging on, just like we today log on to our account on an Office 365 or our computer onto a web, and identifying ourselves instead of like passing our PII around. I think that to me is sort of like what people mean when they say Web3. I think that was one of your questions. But I think it's a combination of technologies, some of which are not necessarily around like Internet of Users. So.
Nuno, I'll go to you next. We've got Web3 as Internet of Users, permissionless, collection of technologies.
Yeah, so first of all, sorry for not being there in person, and hi to my fellow panel members, Nish and Abhi. I'm unfortunately out of the country, but thank you for having me. I work at EY on the technology and media consulting. And basically I see this topic from both sides. Our classic clients are Web2 companies actually on the tech world that are trying to discover the space and see how their models migrate. And we have the smaller component, private equity, VC companies that are actually native to this space. So it's interesting to see the two ecosystems and how the mindset is different. And even the definition of Web3, Nish, like you're saying, differs a lot from the two sides. I would say the space is quite exciting. Totally agree with the remarks just before. I do think that a lot of times when we get into the discussions, we think a lot by analogy, meaning we start thinking about, well, if Web2 does this, how can we do this in Web3? And I think a lot of the value that will actually come from new applications and new ways of doing things. I loved your example, Nish. You were talking about using the wallet and integrating your identity into things that exist. For example, I recently read an interview on Shopify on how they're rethinking on e-commerce, on token-gated commerce, which is basically completely flips the script in terms of personalization. If you think today, a big company owns a lot of your data, tries to grab more data, it's a race for this, and they try to personalize in the ecosystem. Now think in the future where you actually bring your data with you, within your wallet, within your properties, within what you own. And the personalization actually comes from what you bring to the site, not from what the site has from you. And when you start thinking about different models of engagement, different business models even, when you look at, for example, music labels that are being completely challenged on their value chain on third-party services on the music industry, I think that's where the value starts popping up. And a lot of times, you have the audiences that are super hyped, big ambassadors of Web3. You have the audience that is, it's like Web3 is not even a thing. I mean, I don't even know what it is. I think it's important for us to keep a balanced posture, and a cautious optimism on what's coming. But definitely it's a new paradigm of technologies that can create new models. And like anything, we'll still see if this is bigger than the internet or not, like many people say, but it's very, very difficult to stay indifferent to what these things can change in a lot of industries. And I'll tell you that in a lot of clients that we're talking, the conversation is not only about NFTs or having your own token. It's really about, can this change my value chain, and will this change the way I deliver value to all the stakeholders?
Excellent. You actually stole my next question, but let me start with you again. Is this really happening? Are all applications of Web2 are going to move to Web3? What are your clients saying? What are you hearing from your colleagues?
I think that's highly unlikely, meaning there's a lot of, and I think that's a false premise that, everything should live in the blockchain. There's a lot of inefficiencies from decentralized constructs. There's a lot of value that they can bring, but there's not a world, in my view, that shifts everything to a construct that, it sits in a public protocol, it's fully decentralized. I think it's a hybrid of that. What I hear from the companies I work with, I mean, depending on the audience that I outlined, the big Web2 companies are, getting their feet wet in the space. I think there's some use cases that are very easy to understand. So, for example, when you take consumer brands on the NFT side, they get it. It's a marketing campaign, it's IP. I get that. There's some use cases that are more complex that I think they're still exploring. And then you have on the VC side and the private equity side, I mean, the amount of activity that we see there is just astounding. I mean, a lot of our partners, even as we speak the market how it is, they're committing more than half of their portfolio and half of their investment to crypto native companies. And so I can see a lot of interest, a lot of big companies intrigued about the space, wanting to hear about it all the time, not really knowing what will happen in the next 2 years. And I see a sheer amount of innovation and investment on the startup scene that, I mean, if you read about this space, if you go on vacation 2 weeks and you come back and read again, it's kind of, you missed the entire movie. So it's a very fascinating space, even during these times that everyone is shaking a little bit in their chairs if you guys own crypto or any project in Web3.
So you're saying don't go on vacation, you're going to miss something here.
100%. Always read your phone.
Abhi, if I can take some opinion from you on, is everything going to move to Web3? We always talk about a use case about the truck company. Yeah. Can you share that use case with the audience? And firstly, is the shift really happening towards Web3 in your mind?
I think there is a balance of centralized platform versus decentralized platform solution. I agree with what Nuno said. There is some level of inefficiency in decentralizing, storing multiple copies of your ledger in a decentralized platform, and I don't think every use case will benefit from that, right? So, and the shift is going to be gradual if ever it happens, right? We are seeing a lot of notion of, you said about blockchains, which is kind of the building blocks. So you got 4 building blocks for Web 3.0. You got the wallet, you got the tokens, you got your blockchain, and you got smart contracts. So these are the 4 building blocks for crypto and Web 3.0. But when you look at blockchain, which is more about users' internet, right? But there is a big use case where companies are applying that in a more private space. So they're creating something called as private blockchains, which is a big use case. So one of the things that you and I are talking about is the domain of supply chain management, right? So we talk a lot about fintech, right? Of course, everybody hears about crypto, everybody hears about NFTs, everybody hears about DeFi, which are one of those table stakes areas where crypto evolved into Web 3.0. But there are other industries who are leveraging, harnessing the power of Web 3.0, like things like private blockchain and things like global decentralization, security, openness, and they are creating this enterprise-grade solutions. Supply chain management, if you look at supply-demand management, it's a lot about, in today's world, it's global. It's increasingly getting complex, international players all over, things are shipped all across the world. Everywhere consumers, producers, your suppliers, even carriers, right? There's inherent lack of transparency when it comes to that. So some of the use cases we talked about is how there are firms who are actually putting something like a blockchain in between and creating this entire level of transparency across every player to reduce errors, to increase efficiency, to reduce costs, and make these international transactions easier, right? Now, and again, like the specific example you and I discussed about, which is pretty exciting. Imagine you're doing grocery, you get a bag of salad, and you have the bag of salad, you know on what farm this salad was grown, what is the distribution mechanism, how it actually landed to you, and think from the manufacturer's perspective, they have directly access to the consumers of their product. ultimately giving them the power of voice of customer without any intermediary in between. Now, having said that, not everything happens on a public network. These are the examples where it can still happen securely for large organizations to transition into a more privatized, controlled environment, harnessing the power of Web 3.0.
Nish, what is happening in the technology world?
Yeah, so I think you mean finance and technology. Look, I think I want to address this question if everything is going to move to Web3, and so then what's the implication on financial services? And I think both Nuno and kind of Abhi echoed this. If you look at, today, we still live in some spaces in Web 1, right? Google is an example of that. It's not a social, social web, right? It's aggregated, it's all indexed, and that's what we are using. So similarly, at the end of the day, Web 2 is basically companies making these powerful networks and then consumers deriving value of it by interacting and sharing their between their friends and families or like-minded people. So, as things move to this new paradigm in certain areas, there will still be power of things which are generated by the company that are of value from a societal or consumer standpoint. Things like Google or others will exist. There will still be value for social networks, and I don't think, yes, people have talked about decentralized, distributed social networks. It has been outside of Web3. If you go and look and, making two social networks talk to each other that are across boundaries. And there is progress being made in that area. But, at the end of the day, if you as a company are able to create a social network or any sort of network, right, marketplace networks, that has value and people are going to use it. And they are going to trade off their privacy or other things in order to derive the value from that, which is one of the big things that people talk about or are outraged about today. I remember when in 2000, we were all used to free emails. And if you remember, after the .com bubble bust, all of that went away. I think Yahoo started charging $10 per month or something like that. And then Google came out and said, we are going to go to a 1 gigabyte free as we were launching. But we are going to look into your emails and use that to target ads and et cetera. And some people were outraged, but still, look at the day today. Everybody's personal email is essential Gmail, right? So I think people will always trade, what is valuable to them if there is going to be value in return. And that could be through Web 1 type of companies and social network companies. What's going to, at least on the financial services and technology space, what's changing is, I think there are two areas that are looking very promising. There are a lot of things that are being worked on, all these like NFT and esoteric tokens, ways of owning wealth and assets. But the ones where real business value looks to be coming out are in spaces similar to what Abhi was mentioning around back-end reconciliation things through smart contracts. Walmart, I don't know if you guys read about this, it has been in news. Walmart Canada has adopted blockchain quite successfully and uses it for tracking invoices and payments, and that was a big success story for Walmart. And there are equivalents of that in the financial services space, home loan closing, auto loans. If you go, has a bunch of things that get sold, from title transfers to insurance to Gap and all that, right? And it's pretty manual process right now. And so there's opportunities to disrupt, and companies are trying that. And I think I would venture to say in 5 to 10 years, a lot of these things where we pull our hair when we go and try to get a rate for a home loan or try to close it are going to become more streamlined as a result of smart contracts and some of the concept of Web3. The other one is, of course, which we are talking about, which is on front end, which personally is very exciting, which is logging onto Web3, that concept of like, I've logged on and like, this is my identity. And I don't have to go to individual websites to submit my name, address, social security, and all that. And things can be pushed to me or is permissioned by me. So I think that will lead to some new ways of consumption on the front end. And there will be companies that will come out that will capitalize on it where PII data is no longer passed around. And you can think about like all types of interesting things like pre-qualification, loan offers, cross-sells, and different things that arise in financial services domain.
Love it, love it. To your example of Yahoo, I'm not going to pay them money to access my email or to anybody.
Right.
So basically, you are saying new economies of new economic models will come out of this wave of Web3. Jack Dorsey is already talking about Web5. But if I have to summarize, it is new economic models, various means to leverage your data, identity as in getting into internet. I mean, it's already there if you use MetaMask, right? So that's my identity, that's my entry into the world of Web3. Why don't we do one thing? Let's ease it a little bit. Let's break it up for the audiences. Generic use cases. Abhi, we will stay away from your supply chain use case, very complicated. Let's find out some financial services, fintech related use cases, or maybe insurtech. Does insurtech have a use case in Web3, Nuno?
Definitely. I mean, I can talk about so many use cases that I've been hearing lately. I mean, one thing that I'll tell you that I just talked with the startup yesterday was NFT insurance. As simple as this. And as soon as I saw the title, it was an introduction call. I was like, okay, that makes total sense. And I'm sure there's already a lot of people that thought about this. But actually, when I was talking with the startup, I mean, there is policies that start contemplating digital assets. Investment funds have their own, backup insurance to what they hold. But there's really no real mature solution for retail insurance of NFTs. And you start looking at the amount that is transacted on that market and you start thinking, is there any asset that was transacted so fast, that grew so fast that don't have any kind of collateral? And it's interesting that, there's an entire set of policies, there's an entire set of platforms that will have to be thought through in terms of, insurance. You see that everything that is happening, I'm not just talking about the high profile hacks on Discord and, what happened with Bored Apes 2 weeks ago, but I'm talking about, the average consumer that loses passwords, the average consumer that, any security flaws can have a type of problem. So just that entire space, if you start thinking, and again, discounting the 50% drop we've seen in the last few weeks, but if you start seeing the progression of value that you have on that asset class, I mean, you start thinking that you need platforms to do this. You need to integrate everything you have when you buy on a protocol, when you have things on an exchange, when you have things on a public wallet. What's the interface that actually, interconnects everything and actually gives you some sort of collateral? And you see that in any purchase that you have, you see in any portfolio that you have. So the NFT insurance space, it's very interesting. I've as soon as I was talking with this founder that is extremely smart, and she comes from the law side. She actually works on an insurance company. She works on a SaaS company for insurance. So she has this kind of blend of things. I know that there's a class of companies that will grow there. Now, I'm not sure if it will be the insurtech, native companies that will get it. I'm not sure if it will be the insurance companies, but definitely a new class that I just found out that is definitely a very strong use case in the space.
Abhi, to me, Web3 is all full of solutions. There are no problems. Can we take our financial services Web2 problems to Web3? Define some use cases for us.
So number one, I think there is a big push in increased legitimacy of Web3, right? So one of the biggest challenges Web3 has faced in the past few years is in terms of its regulation. We all know that, right? The good news is there are leading governments and regulations which actually are forming a consensus that pushing away crypto, pushing away Web 3.0 is actually going to push away talent and innovation away from the jurisdiction, right? And ultimately, they're going to miss this potential once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So that's a good news for Web 3 in terms of adoption. And I think even in the wealth management world, right, there is a new ETF that's going to come in the next month or so called Web 3, WIII for Roman numeral 3. That calls out, like what Nuno was saying, that there's a big push from investors' perspective to actually have this kind of asset class in their portfolio, right? And if you think about ETFs, things like ETF make it easy to invest, like any investor for that matter, right? Without going to one of those fiat exchanges and other places, you can still go and buy a ETF, right? So what I'm saying is that I think it's a little bit interesting. So it's not about, so I'm not making any recommendation to what to get or not, right, by no means. But I'm just saying the space, like Nuno is saying, is evolving. More and more we are seeing different use cases, different providers, adding that. But I'll just put a word of caution, right? There's a lot of noise around, right? There's noise, facts versus fiction, and everybody needs to be, I like what Nuno said, cautiously optimistic, right? Where is solutioning, where is investing, whatever it may be, right? Because there are a lot of things that are going around the market, right, in terms of Web3's fast-changing environment. And I would suggest everybody to be a little bit more conscious about it. And that's the problem about Web3 having a lot of solutions and not many problems, because it's a lot about mass adoption. Because if you think about adoption of something new, it's a mind shift. Now, even if we as folks coming from technology, from fintech space, we keep that hat aside and just look at as consumers. From consumers' perspective, it's a different mind shift. Okay, how do I go and get a song on a different distribution network than the traditional distribution network? So it's a different mind shift. And I think the shift will be gradual with more education from the consumer's perspective as well.
Nish, you have some lending experience. Are there any lending use cases in Web3 that a fintech can solve for?
Yeah, I mean, one of them I touched upon, which is any current lending process which is still very manual and requires a lot of reconciliation, right? Home tends to be that, auto tends to be that on the front end. I mean, beyond lending, I think if you look at today, there are actually successful use cases, and as I mentioned, you guys will recall having read about this. So, especially in the crypto space, so wherever there are environments that are very inflationary or hyperinflationary, talk about Argentina or some other countries like Ukraine actually. Crypto has been successfully used by people to solve real problems. I mean, lack of currency or just value of currency, just volatility in the value of the currency. Currency exchange or money transfers, another place where it's being used, and you see a lot of companies coming in, especially in Africa and other places, and making remittances easier, and that's actually being now mass adopted as we speak. I mean, these companies came in last 2-3 years, and some of them are getting acquired and integrated with the larger banks. So there are all these use cases that that have been very successful, especially in the crypto side, and then again, bunch of different areas like blockchain is different and smart contracts are different, but those technologies of Web3 that came in 4 or 5 years ago, now you're seeing getting more adopted by mainstream companies.
Before I ask my last question, there was a lot of talk outside about blockchain, Web3. I want to open it up for the audiences. Is there a question from the audience to my panel? Please. The lady in blue. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is more around, you mentioned the education, right? Just like previous with e-commerce, when people were starting to spend, it was a lot about educating them so that they know, like you said, hey, as a consumer, all I want to do is buy something. If it's too complicated, I'm going to buy it over here. And technology-wise, it's like you said, it's distributed, it's got some challenges. It's very tech-oriented right now. How do we educate and simplify even basic things like, hey, this loan might be backed by a small cryptocurrency, or this one is backed by stablecoin. And most people don't even know that kind of thing unless you're on the bleeding edge of it. So how do you see that happening? Who's going to drive that?
Excellent question. Excellent question. I can take one more question and then maybe we can answer. Okay.
Thank you. You mentioned Africa as one of the markets where this is being developed. Are there any other specific markets or specific use cases where it's been successfully adopted, crypto specifically?
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to the financial literacy, I mean, in large set that if you can demystify for the group. But I'll add my last question too, right? So how do we begin this journey? Probably that will answer this question also. What is the start? How do we begin in this space? Like first, if you can answer from journal industry perspective, and then add how education can be part of it.
It's a tough question, and that's why everybody's wondering about it, right? So I'll give my perspective about it. At this point, right, as we start developing, as companies, like you said, they're developing more Web 3.0 based applications, a lot of onus is going to go on the companies to educate the end customers in terms of educating them what does these terms actually mean, because there is awareness, but sometimes there's lack of clarity in consumers' mind. So a lot would be going, if you leave the customers to just go and search the internet, I don't know, I think many people will actually get out more confused than educated. So I'll suggest that the companies, if you're making a product, maybe have a good glossary of FAQs, right? Help out your end users in terms of how we are using technology or what are we doing about it, and maybe sway away from the technical buzz, because that is one of the biggest things of Web 3.0. It's about, the first thing you see is blockchain. I'm like, oh, it is blockchain, right? And when you look at Web 2.0, you don't talk about databases. You don't know about underlying pinnings of how the Web 2.0 e-commerce website was built, right? So I think it's a lot about solutions versus the technology, which I think the companies have to orient themselves and the customer bases around it.
Nuno, if I can go to you, except for don't go on vacation, how do we learn more about Web3? And
I couldn't agree more. I could agree more, Abhi, to what you said. And to answer that question, the other day I met a company that is in Lake Nona. I don't know if you guys know, in Orlando, there's like a health tech hub. And they're a company that is doing loyalty Web3 based programs. And the way they talked about the company, I didn't hear any buzzword that, in this space we always throw, you always hear the token, blockchain, protocol. In the entire pitch, they never talked about blockchain. They talked that, they're a platform that brings in points, creates a marketplace. If you're from different universities, you can trade the points for prizes. And all of a sudden, I understand that they're fully, Web3 native. They have a token behind it. Everything goes to Solana, and they didn't talk about it. So, and I think that's the first step, which is not all the companies have to be, for the sake of being technology based and have to introduce themselves from a technology perspective. If we're solving a problem, if we're going to an end consumer or even a B2B company, we have to talk about the value. And a lot of times it's not talking about technical words that don't need to be there. I think that's one component. The second component is, and you both were touching this, for me, the best thing in this space, forget everything that we talk on the use cases and the money, is the amount of brilliant people trying to create new things, is the amount of money being funneled to create new things. And either you love the use cases, either you're a skeptic or a passionate, you have to love a movement that brings so many people together, funds new ideas, and is cooperation at scale. In the beginning, when I started working on this topic, I was looking for the geography where I could look, where I could go to actually talk with people. And, I mean, Puerto Rico, Switzerland, yes, because of tax reasons, but you don't have a region really, like we have Silicon Valley, like we have Shenzhen.
Yeah.
You don't really have a region because this is fully global. And I think from an education perspective, everyone should be included, should be very inclusive. There's a lot of problems on inclusion. I mean, the audience of crypto skews male, at a certain age. So there's a lot of work to be done, but definitely it's on us working on this to bring more people in and embrace innovation, in fact.
So believe in value. Thank you. Thank you. Nish, if you can quickly take the other question, please.
So sorry, what was the other question? What is the...
So he was talking about the example. Can you elaborate a little bit more on your African example?
Yeah, so what in the currency exchange, essentially, if you have done remittances across, it's always across international boundaries, but especially in LATAM, Africa, Asia, the process is still very slow, and so there are companies that were founded 10 years ago that kind of digitized the process and made it easy. And I think what has happened in the last couple of years is crypto is now being used as a way of holding value in short term and easing that transaction. So that's the very
thank you
very high level sort of.
Thank you, Nish. Nuno, thank you for joining from such a far land and joining and sharing your thoughts with us. Abhi and Nish, thank you for joining. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you, guys.